I've believed in God for as long as I can remember. From the moment I was old enough to make sense of the world, faith was at the core of everything. My mother always told me, "Without God, we are nothing, Meek. Remember that." And I did. Those words stayed with me as I grew, shaping my path. By the time I was a teenager, I knew I wanted to dedicate my life to serving Him. Becoming a priest wasn't just a decision, it felt like my destiny, or at least that's what I told myself. I spent years in seminary, diving deep into scripture, theology, and church doctrine. I memorized prayers, performed rituals, and learned what it meant to be a shepherd for God's people. When I was finally ordained, it felt like everything had fallen into place. I had a purpose, a mission. For years, I served in a small town in Mexico, a place where faith was woven into everyday life. The people trusted me. They came to me for advice, for guidance, for comfort when life felt unbearable. I baptized their children, officiated their weddings, blessed their homes. On the surface, I was everything a priest should be, but deep inside, something was off. I never spoke about it. How could I? A priest is supposed to be unwavering, a pillar of faith. Yet in the quiet moments, when the church was empty and the candlelight flickered against the old stone walls, I felt it. Doubt. I led Mass with devotion, prayed daily, followed every tradition. But sometimes, I wondered, was I truly bringing people closer to God, or was I just maintaining an institution? Was I really connected to Him, or just going through the motions? I tried to push those thoughts away, convincing myself they were just fleeting moments of weakness. But they never fully left me. And then one night, everything changed. It started like any other evening. The town had gone quiet, most people already home with their families. I had finished my prayers for the night and was alone in the church, sitting before the altar. The only sounds were the distant chirping of crickets and the wind slipping through the cracks in the old wooden doors. I looked up at the large crucifix above the altar, staring into the eyes of Jesus on the cross. What am I missing, I thought. Why do I feel so far from you? I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, asking for guidance, for clarity, anything to take away this emptiness. Then it happened. At first it was just a slight pressure in my chest. Nothing alarming, just enough to make me shift uncomfortably. I adjusted my posture, thinking I had been sitting too long, but the pressure grew stronger, spreading like fire through my ribs. My breath caught. My hand gripped my chest as pain shot down my arm. My strength drained in an instant. My vision blurred, the candlelight stretching into strange, distorted streaks. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't move. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out every other sound. I was dying. The realization hit me like a brick. My body was shutting down, right here, in the very place I had dedicated my life to serving. Alone, with no one to call for help. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the altar, as if touching it could somehow anchor me, keep me here. But my strength was slipping away too fast. My knees buckled and I collapsed onto the cold tile floor. My head struck the ground, but I barely felt the impact. The only thing I knew was the crushing weight in my chest, the burning in my lungs as I struggled for air. I wanted to speak, maybe a final prayer, maybe just a cry for help, but no words came. The edges of my vision darkened. My thoughts slowed, fading like an echo. And then, everything went still. No pain, no sound, just nothing. I don't know how long I lingered in that emptiness. Seconds, minutes, hours. Time didn't exist. I just was. Then something shifted. A strange sensation washed over me, as if I were being lifted. Not physically, but in a way I couldn't explain. Slowly I became aware of the room again, but not as I had before. It was as if I was seeing it from a different angle. And that's when I saw myself, lying on the floor, motionless. My own body, lifeless, beneath me. I wasn't in it anymore. That was the moment I knew I was dead. It was like being pulled upward by an invisible force, gentle yet undeniable. I didn't resist. I wasn't even sure I could. Then I saw myself. There I was, lying motionless on the cold tile floor of the church. My body looked small, fragile, like an empty shell left behind. My arms rested limply at my sides, and the flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows across my pale face. I even noticed the small smear of blood where my head had struck the ground. It was surreal. I was looking at myself, yet I felt no fear. Shouldn't I have been panicking? But all I felt was an eerie calm, as if the chaos of the world had slipped away. I hovered there, watching, unable to move closer or farther away. The church, my familiar sanctuary where I had spent years praying, preaching and serving, suddenly felt different. It wasn't just the perspective, it was the atmosphere. Something had shifted. Then I saw it, a shadow. It flickered just beyond the reach of the candlelight, shifting between the pews. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, but then I realized it was getting closer, and it wasn't alone. More shadows emerged from the darkness, slithering like smoke, their forms shifting and twisting unnaturally. They had no faces, no features, just darkness. Yet I could feel them. The air grew colder, heavier, like an unseen weight pressing down on me. Even though I was no longer in my body, the sensation was suffocating. The calm I had felt moments ago vanished, replaced by a deep, creeping dread. The shadows didn't speak, not in words, but I could hear them. Whispers, faint, chilling. They carried secrets I couldn't quite understand, but their tone sent a shiver through me. And then I felt it, a pull. Not physical, but something deeper, something I couldn't fight. It was as if unseen hands were grasping at my very essence, dragging me away from the altar's glow, deeper into the dark. I struggled, trying to resist, but it was like swimming against a raging current. The harder I fought, the stronger the pull became. Panic surged through me. Was this it? Was this where I was meant to go? I thought about all the sermons I had preached, all the times I had warned others about spiritual warfare. But now I was living it, and for the first time I understood. This darkness wasn't just emptiness, it was alive. And it wanted me. My mind screamed for help, but I had no voice. I had no body. I could only watch as the shadows closed in, their whispers growing into a low, menacing hum. And then something happened. A light. At first, it was just a faint glimmer in the distance, like a single spark in an endless void. But it grew, brighter, stronger, slicing through the darkness like a blade. The shadows recoiled. They hissed, twisting and retreating as the light expanded, pushing them back. The crushing weight that had been pulling me down lifted in an instant. In its place, a warmth unlike anything I had ever known spread through me. It wasn't just around me, it was within me. The light wasn't harsh or blinding. It was radiant, pure, powerful, yet gentle, like it was embracing me, holding me. I couldn't look away. I didn't want to. And this time, when I felt a pull, I didn't resist. As I moved closer, the whispers of the shadows faded into silence. A silence that wasn't empty, but full, almost musical. It was peaceful, yet charged with anticipation, like something extraordinary was just beyond reach. The closer I got, the more I felt it, a presence within the light. This wasn't just light for the sake of light. It was alive. It was full of love, of power, and it was calling to me. For the first time since leaving my body, I didn't feel lost. I didn't feel afraid. All I felt was the undeniable certainty that I was being drawn towards something far greater than myself. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a dream. I was being called. The light wrapped around me, pulling me deeper into its warmth. And then I saw him. At the center of the radiance stood a figure. He wasn't just in the light. He was the light. His features were clear, yet carried something more, something beyond human comprehension. His face radiated love and compassion, but there was also an undeniable authority, a power that made everything else seem insignificant. I stopped, if you could call it stopping. I simply existed in awe. Then he spoke. Javier! Hearing my name in his voice was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just a sound, it was a knowing, a calling, and in that moment I understood. This was real, and nothing would ever be the same again. It wasn't just a voice, it was something deeper, something that resonated within my very soul. Javier. He said my name again, and this time I felt it. Not as condemnation, not as anger, just truth. I couldn't speak. What could I possibly say? I had spent my life speaking about Jesus, preaching his teachings, encouraging others to follow him. And yet, here I was, standing in his presence, completely unprepared. He stepped closer, and the love radiating from him was almost unbearable. Not a love I had earned, not a love I deserved. It was simply there, overwhelming, unconditional. You have served me? He said, his voice gentle but unwavering. You have dedicated your life to my work. But Javier, do you truly know me? The question struck like a thunderclap. My mind raced. Of course I knew him, didn't I? I had spent decades studying scripture, leading mass, teaching others about his life and sacrifice. But standing there, face to face with Jesus, an unsettling realization crept in. I didn't truly know him. I thought I did, I managed to say, though my words felt weak, hollow. His expression was impossible to describe, sorrowful yet hopeful, as if he already knew my answer but was waiting for me to realize it myself. You know about me, he said, his tone gentle yet piercing. You know the stories, the rituals, the words. But have you ever truly known me? Have you sought my heart? Or have you only followed my rules? His words cut through me like a blade. I had spent my life focused on the rituals, the structure, the traditions of the church. I had measured my faith by my obedience to the institution, by how well I followed its guidelines. But had I ever truly sought him? Had I ever opened my heart beyond the words on the page? Tears welled up in my eyes as the weight of it all came crashing down. I thought of all the sermons I had preached, all the advice I had given. So many times I had urged others to trust in Jesus, yet I had been too afraid to truly do the same. I don't know, I whispered, my voice trembling. I thought I was doing what you wanted. I thought I was serving you. Jesus reached out, his hand resting on my shoulder. The warmth of his touch filled me, not just with comfort, but with conviction. You have done many good things, Javier, he said. But faith is not just about what you do, it is about who you are, with me. It is about knowing me, loving me, and letting that love guide everything you do. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They spilled down my face as I fell to my knees before him. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I thought I was enough. I thought I was doing enough. But now I see. I was missing the most important thing. Jesus knelt beside me, his eyes full of nothing but love. It is not too late, Javier, he said softly. You can still know me. You can still walk with me, not just for me. His words were a lifeline, pulling me from the despair I hadn't even realized I was sinking into. For the first time I understood the difference between the faith I had practiced and the faith he was calling me to. It wasn't about rituals. It wasn't about structure. It wasn't even about my title as a priest. It was about him. Teach me, I said, looking up at him through my tears. Teach me how to know you. Jesus smiled, and in that moment the light around us seemed to grow even brighter. This is only the beginning, Javier, he said, but there is much more to see. And with that, The world around us shifted. The light deepened, as though it carried layers of meaning I couldn't yet grasp. Jesus stood before me, unwavering, his presence both powerful and gentle. "You have spent your life serving me," he said, "but there is a deeper truth you need to see." Before I could respond, the light transformed. Suddenly I wasn't standing in its warmth anymore. I was watching. Scenes from my own life unfolded before me, as though I were looking through a window. But these weren't just memories. They were moments of my ministry, seen now through his eyes. I saw myself blessing a family's new home. The mother held her baby tightly, her eyes filled with gratitude as I sprinkled holy water and prayed over them. At the time I had felt proud, thinking I was bringing God's presence into their lives. But now, I saw what I had missed. I had rushed through the blessing, distracted by my schedule, by the next appointment. I hadn't taken the time to truly listen, to understand their fears, their hopes. I had performed the ritual, but I hadn't been present with them. The scene shifted. Now I was in the church, delivering a sermon. The pews were full. I spoke passionately about faith, about obedience. I had given that sermon countless times, convinced I was inspiring my congregation to follow God. But as I watched it now, I saw their faces, and for the first time, I realized I had been speaking to them, but I had never truly seen them. For the first time, I truly saw them. Faces filled with doubt, pain, and longing. They weren't looking for rules. They weren't searching for rituals. They were searching for something deeper, something real. And I had missed it. I hadn't met them where they were. Tears welled in my eyes as the scenes continued to unfold before me, moment after moment, where I had focused on tradition, on the outward expressions of faith, while overlooking the deeper needs of the people I was called to serve. It wasn't that the rituals were wrong. They had their place. But I had made them the center of my ministry instead of making Jesus the center. "Do you see now, Javier?" His voice cut through the weight of my emotions. "Faith is not about the actions you perform. It's about the love you live. The rituals are meant to point to me, but too often they become the focus instead of the means." I nodded, unable to speak. The truth of his words was undeniable, and it pierced me to my core. For so long, I had believed that being a good priest meant following the rules, leading the ceremonies, and upholding the traditions of the church. But now, I saw how shallow that understanding had been. Jesus continued, "The church is not an institution, Javier. It is my body. It is the people who seek me, who love me, and who love one another. It is not built with stone or wood, but with hearts open to my grace." As he spoke, the scenes shifted again. This time, I saw moments when I had truly lived his love, without even realizing it. I saw myself sitting beside an elderly woman who had just lost her husband, holding her hand as she wept. I saw myself giving the last rites to a young man in a hospital bed. His family gathered around, their faces etched with sorrow. I saw myself helping a poor farmer repair his roof after a storm, my hands blistered from the work. "These were the moments when you knew me, Javier," Jesus said. "Not because of what you were doing, but because of how you were loving. These were the times when your heart was aligned with mine. Awe and shame mixed within me as I watched, awe at the sheer power of love, how it could bring light even in the darkest moments, and shame at how rarely I had let that love guide me fully. For every moment of true connection, there were countless others where I had fallen short, where I had chosen structure over sincerity, ritual over relationship. Jesus stepped closer, his eyes filled with compassion. "Javier, I do not condemn you. I know your heart, and I know the burdens you have carried, but now you see the truth, and with that truth comes a choice. I swallowed hard. A choice. Yes, he said. You can continue as you were, doing good, but never fully knowing me. Or you can let go of the traditions that have held you back and step into the fullness of my love. You can lead others to me, not through rituals, but through a life that reflects my grace. The weight of his words settled over me. There was no turning back. I couldn't unsee what he had shown me. I couldn't unlearn the truth. For so long I had thought my role as a priest was to preserve the church. But now I understood. It was about something far greater. Pointing people to Jesus, helping them know him, the way I was coming to know him now. I choose you, I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. I want to truly know you, to live for you. Jesus smiled, and the light around him seemed to glow even brighter. Then, follow me, Javier, and trust that I will guide you every step of the way. As he spoke, warmth filled my chest, a peace unlike anything I had ever known. The doubts, the fears, the questions that had plagued me for so long, they weren't gone completely, but they no longer controlled me. This was the beginning of something new, something real. The light around us shifted once more, and I could feel it. My journey wasn't over yet. There was more to see, more to understand. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. It is not your strength that will carry this mission, Javier. It is mine. Jesus' words settled over me like a gentle but undeniable force. He lifted his hand, and in an instant, the light around us shifted. Suddenly I was no longer standing in the calm, radiant space. Instead, I was seeing the world, our world, as if from above. But it wasn't a vision of landscapes or nations. It was a vision of hearts, of souls, of lives. I saw people everywhere moving through their daily routines, yet their faces carried a quiet despair. Some bore the heavy weight of poverty. Others were shackled by loneliness, grief, or regret. Many had everything they could want, the comforts, the security, yet still their eyes held an emptiness. The details of their struggles were different, but the longing was the same. A deep, aching search for something more, something real. Then I saw the churches. Some were filled with people, others nearly empty. But in many of them I could feel it, an absence, a hollow shell. The rituals were being followed, the words spoken, the hymns sung, the traditions upheld. Yet something vital was missing. And then I saw something else. Scattered like tiny sparks in the darkness, I saw moments of true faith. A mother kneeling by her child's bedside, whispering a prayer of protection. A young man choosing forgiveness over anger. A stranger offering kindness to someone in need, expecting nothing in return. Small, quiet moments, easily overlooked by the world. But they were powerful. They carried the very essence of what Jesus had been showing me. Faith was never meant to be about grand displays or rigid practices. It was about love, about humility, about connection. As the vision continued, sorrow welled up in my chest. I ached for the people lost in tradition, those who believed they were doing enough by following the rules, yet had never truly known the love of Jesus. And then I understood. This is why he had said, "It is not too late." These people weren't hopeless. They just needed someone to show them the way. "Do you see, Javier?" His voice broke through the vision. "This is the world I came to save, and it is the world I am calling you to serve." Tears streamed down my face as I turned back to him. "But how?" My voice trembled. "How can I reach them? How can I help them see what I have seen?" Jesus smiled, his expression filled with both encouragement and unwavering conviction. "By living the truth you now know. By showing them my love, not just speaking about it. By walking beside them, not above them. And by reminding them that their worth is not in what they do, but in who they are, in me." His words sank into my soul like seeds planted in rich, fertile soil. I didn't know how I would carry out this mission, but I knew one thing with certainty. I couldn't turn away from it. The world needed this truth, and somehow I had been entrusted to carry it. Before I could respond, Jesus raised his hand. The light around us intensified, wrapping around me like a warmth I could feel, not just on my skin, but in the deepest parts of my being. He placed his hand over my chest, right above my heart. Immediately, peace and power surged through me like a wave. "Javier," he said, his voice both commanding and compassionate, "you are not alone. I will be with you in every step, in every word, in every moment. Trust me, and I will guide you." At that moment, something inside me shifted. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing me to see with a clarity I had never known. The doubts and fears that had once weighed me down, they were still there, but they no longer controlled me, because they were outweighed by something far greater: love, hope, purpose. The light around us began to shift again. I could feel it. My time here was ending. I would have to return to my body, my life, and the mission Jesus had entrusted to me. Before the light fully faded, he spoke once more. "Remember, Javier, it is not about what you know, it is about who you know. And I have always known you." With those final words, the light dimmed, and I felt myself being drawn back. It was as if I were being lowered, gently, carefully, into the world I had left behind. But I was not the same man I had been before. I had been awakened, entrusted with a mission, and I knew I could not fail him. The first thing I noticed as I returned was sound. At first, faint, muffled voices, distant and blurred, then growing clearer, urgent. I could hear the quick, worried tones of people speaking around me. My chest felt heavy, my body weak, but I was alive. Slowly, I forced my eyes open, squinting against the harsh fluorescent light above me. It took a moment to register where I was: a hospital, the steady beep of machines, the cool sensation of an IV in my arm. A nurse leaned over me, relief flooding her face as she saw me stir. "Padre," she whispered, "you're awake." Awake. The word carried so much more meaning than it ever had before. I wasn't just awake physically, I was awake spiritually, in a way I had never been before. The memories of what had just happened, the light, the encounter with Jesus, the mission he had given me, they were as real and vivid as the room I now found myself in. And I knew everything had changed. The doctor came in speaking quickly, his words a blur of medical jargon. A heart attack. They had nearly lost me. It was a miracle I had survived. I nodded along, but I wasn't really listening. My mind was elsewhere, replaying every word Jesus had spoken to me. When the doctor left, I was alone for the first time. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of it all sinking in. I had died. I had stood before Jesus, and now I had been given a second chance, not just at life, but at living with purpose. The next few days passed in a blur. Friends from the parish visited, offering their prayers and support. "You're lucky, Padre. Blessed to be alive." I smiled and thanked them, but I knew this wasn't luck. This was something far greater. As soon as I was strong enough, I began sharing my experience. I told my fellow priests about what had happened, about what Jesus had shown me, the light, the visions, the truth I had come to understand. Faith wasn't about titles or traditions, it was about truly knowing him. Most of them listened politely, then dismissed it just as quickly. "Dreams," they said, "a product of your mind, stress, the trauma of a near-death experience." One of them even patted my shoulder, his tone gentle but patronizing. "Don't read too much into it, Javier." But I couldn't ignore it, because I knew, deep in my soul, What I had seen was real. Not everyone was skeptical. A few people, parishioners, friends, listened with wide eyes, hanging on to every word. One woman's voice trembled as she asked, "Padre, do you think Jesus is really calling us to something different?" I met her gaze, my voice steady. Yes. He's calling all of us, not to blindly follow rituals, but to truly know him, to live with love, humility, and compassion. That conversation was a turning point. It marked the beginning of something new, a shift, not just in me, but in the church. When I returned to my parish, I knew things couldn't go back to the way they were. I couldn't just stand at the altar, lead mass, perform the rituals, and go through the motions, because my heart had changed, and my work had to change too. So I began to see people, not just as a congregation, but as individuals. I listened to their struggles, walked alongside them in their faith. I spent more time with the sick, the poor, the lost, not just offering prayers, but showing them the love of Christ through my actions. My sermons changed too. I no longer preached about obedience to the church as the ultimate goal. Instead, I spoke about Jesus, about the relationship he longs to have with us. I told people they didn't have to earn his love. They only had to receive it. I encouraged them to seek him, not just through rituals, but through their hearts. Some embraced it. They said they felt closer to God than ever before. Others resisted, clinging tightly to the traditions they had known their whole lives, and that was okay. I wasn't there to force anyone to change. I was there to guide, to love, to reflect the truth Jesus had shown me. It wasn't easy. There were days I felt the weight of resistance, days I questioned myself. Am I doing enough? Am I failing the mission he gave me? But in those moments, I would remember his words. You are not alone. I will guide you. Those words became my anchor. Months passed, and slowly, the parish transformed. People who had once felt disconnected from their faith found new meaning in their relationship with God. Families grew closer. Neighbors became more compassionate. The church became less of a building and more of a community. And as for me, I found a peace I had never known before. The doubts that had once haunted me, gone. Because I no longer measured my worth by my role as a priest, or by how well I performed the rituals. I knew now, my worth was in him, and that was enough. One evening, as I sat in the empty church, I let my mind wander back to that night. I remembered the pain, the fear, the suffocating darkness that had surrounded me. But more than that, I remembered the light, the overwhelming radiant presence of Jesus, and I understood. Faith was never meant to be about titles or traditions. It was always meant to be about him, about knowing him, loving him, and letting that love transform every part of our lives. I knelt before the altar and whispered a quiet prayer. Not for myself, but for the people I had been called to serve. Lord, help me to show them what you have shown me. Help me to lead them to you. And in that moment, I felt him again, as real, as powerful, as present as he had been that night. And I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be, doing exactly what I had been called to do. The journey wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next.